Hi everyone, welcome to the June 12th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragonin. I'll be joined very shortly by my usual co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to begin things by taking a look at some of last week's stakes races. You know, the content that we usually cover on the Pacecast. We'll briefly go through some of that since there was a lot of really high-quality stakes racing last weekend, and really all of last week with racing opening up in New York. And then we'll take a look at some races from this upcoming weekend, focusing on Saturday. We'll take a look at the Louisville Stakes down at Churchill Downs, an allowance race from Gulfstream Park, which features a couple of Grade 1 quality stakes horses who will be participating there. And then we'll go to Belmont Park and talk about the entire late pick 4 sequence there, which features the Grade 1 Ogden Phipps for the fillies and mares. Craig, there was a lot of really high-quality racing last week. Obviously, there was what was going on in New York. We had a Derby prep out at Santa Anita. Where do you want to begin?
I guess the best place to start is at Belmont because that's where most of the best figures took place, including the return of Newspaper of Record, who honestly I was a little bit against heading into that race, but boy, did she prove last year was kind of the aberration and not her 2-year-old season. She had the fastest number of the week, a 1:27. We also saw Vekoma, who backed up his allowance win in his second start as a 4-year-old with a really nice 1:25, which I assume will set him up nicely for the Met Mile. Still Regard rebounded from his subpar effort at the fairgrounds. There was just so much going on. Which ones really stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think the star performances on Saturday at Belmont were definitely turned in by Newspaper of Record and Vekoma. I mean, as you said, Newspaper of Record had showed so much talent early on, and it's nice to see her get back to the winner's circle, but really to get back to that kind of showing that sort of freakish talent that we saw out of her as a 2-year-old, because that 1:27 TimeformUS speed figure that she earned, that's among the highest that we're going to see in that division all year, I would imagine. She did get her preferred yielding course that she definitely likes. She showed a preference for that early on in her career, so we'll see if she's as effective over firm going moving forward, but I think getting back to those aggressive tactics really worked for her. And as for Vekoma, I mean, it's unfortunate that the track conditions sort of threw a monkey wrench into some of the results, but I don't think there's any denying that Vekoma was just the best horse in the Carter. He just decimated that field. That 1:25 TimeformUS speed figure, that's, you know, right up there at Grade 1 level. That'll make him competitive in all the Grade 1 races in this division moving forward. Sounds like they're leaning towards a sprint campaign with him, which I like to hear because he's just so fast. I think those are really the right races to point him to.
Yeah, and speaking of sprinters, I think we have to talk a little about it. At Churchill Downs, we had Volatile, who had been so impressive winning at Oaklawn, and he went to Churchill and just backed it right up, running another really fast race. He got a 1:24. I think the final time figure was a 1:30 for him. I haven't read up on what the plans are for him, but he certainly is right there at the top of the sprint division also.
No, this performance was jaw-dropping. I mean, I know that you look up the chart and he had what we code as a slow pace, but this is one of those situations where it's coded as a slow pace for the sole fact that he just sprinted through the stretch. I mean, the others weren't taking advantage of any kind of slow pace because they were slowing down at the end, but Volatile, I mean, his final quarter mile, I think just looking at the raw time, he ran it in 23.2 seconds. I mean, you just don't see front-running sprinters able to throw those kind of finishing fractions down, and he's very exciting. He's only raced a few times. I think this was his 5th or 6th career start, but he definitely is reminding you of Matoli at this stage of his career with the way he finished off this race, and he's going to have the same questions to answer that Matoli did after his first few starts. Can he stretch out that brilliant speed at 6 furlongs to 7? Because a lot of the Grade 1 races in this division will be at 7 furlongs down the line. We'll see what happens when he gets there, but boy, he's got to be considered one of the fastest horses in the country.
Yeah, he does. And honestly, it doesn't look like another furlong or maybe even 2 around one turn would be any problem for him whatsoever. He really finishes off his races like a horse like Matoli did. So the sky's the limit for him. Just a really impressive effort. That said, we had Honor AP out at Santa Anita return after his, kind of that break they had out there. He was second last time out and just showed that he's developed some. He appreciated the longer distance. distance. He ran a 122 Timeform US speed figure, which is right up there with the best 3-year-olds we've seen all year, including Tiz the Law, who I guess is really the only fastest one with a really fast figure still on the Derby trail. But I was really impressed with Honor AP. I didn't think Authentic ran a bad race at all. He ran a good second, but Honor AP just took it to another level, and he couldn't match it.
Yeah, this is, I think, a pivotal race for Honor AP because he had showed so much promise early on, and obviously his loss to Authentic last time in the San Felipe, that was coming off a significant layoff for Honor AP, so you wanted to see him take a step forward in this race, and he really did everything that you could have asked him to do. I mean, he ran an impressive speed figure for 3-year-olds at this stage of the year. He defeated his main rival pretty soundly. I'll let you talk a little bit more about Authentic's trip in this race, but I thought Honor AP was just the best horse on this day, and you could make the argument that distances of 1 1/8 and even beyond that in the future, they're really going to be what gives Honor AP an edge moving forward because he seems to have no problem with added ground. And it just seems like these two horses might be moving in different directions at this point. I think Honor AP is really on the up and up. And Authentic, I mean, he looked so brilliant at the beginning of his career. And I think the real question with Authentic would be, or was, what would happen when he got a real challenge? And he got a real challenge in this race and just couldn't answer it from Honor AP. But this speed figure looks totally legitimate, the 122 that Honor AP got, because horses in behind him like Anno Dor and Shooter Shoot, they ran their races. They just weren't nearly good enough to be close to these top two.
Right, and I don't want to overrate Authentic's trip. I don't think it was ideal by any means. He kind of broke bad. He was wide around the turn. So I think the 120 run is very legitimate. But that said, I'm not sure if the horse gets out, makes an easy lead, and Honor AP tracks him, that he still doesn't run by him. I think he was the best horse on the in the race for sure, and the sky's the limit with him as well, as I mentioned with Volatile. The other performance at Santa Anita I wanted to talk about was Improbable. I know we had talked about it on the forecast, and he was very impressive for me. He proved that the 10 furlongs isn't really a problem. I don't think it was the strongest field you're ever going to face in one of these. I think they actually went back to calling it the Hollywood Gold Cup, which was kind of a nice thing to see. But I was impressed with Improbable, and given that it's our older horse division is still kind of a bit in flux, he's right there at the top of it. He's ran as well as anybody we've seen this year, in my opinion.
We talked about this on the forecast last week, previewing this race, and we were both spot on with our opinions here. Improbable is the kind of horse that I think fools people that don't look at trips enough, because it's tempting to make the results that he's garnered in his career all about the distances that he ran, when really he had run just as well in his longer races as he had in his shorter races. It just so happened that some of the shorter races were better situations for him, and those happened to be the times that he worked out better trips. But he had run well enough going 1.25 miles in the past to suggest if he took any kind of typical step forward from 3 to 4, the kind of step forward that he suggested he probably took in that Oaklawn Stakes last time back in April, he was going to be tough to beat in this race, and that was just the case. He ran, I believe, his career best Timeform US speed figure of 126. As you said, showed the 1.25 miles is no problem. I mean, obviously, the trip of it that he worked out in this race was ideal, but he's the kind of horse that when he breaks fine, he can work out that good trip. The break has been a problem in the past, but recently it seems like maybe he's getting over those issues. So I think Improbable is going to be a real major force in this handicap division moving forward for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and speaking of that, there is one more horse from Santa Anita I want to talk about, and he ran on Sunday, and that's McKenzie. He was one of the top older horses last year. He came back with a nice win, a 118 Timeform US speed figure. And I just wanted to mention him because that 118 probably is not a very reliable figure. I mean, it's accurate for the horses in the field, but the pace was just so slow in that race. I actually went back. Santa Anita had a bunch of timing problems this weekend, but I went and timed it from video. It was completely legit, and it really had an effect on the final time, I think. So I'm not going to let that diminish how dominant McKenzie really was in this race. He beat a good horse like Flagstaff, who was probably hindered by the pace back and forth, but I just wanted to point out, I don't think the margin or the figure really represent how good McKenzie is, and I expect a much faster effort, assuming he shows up in the Met Mile, which I think is his target. it. And that's a race he almost won last year when he lost to the horse Matoli we talked about earlier. And despite a very rough trip, some would even argue he was best that day. Many have.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this race accomplished what they were looking to get out of it if it was just a prep for the Met Mile. I wasn't thrilled with this effort from McKenzie. I mean, once you took Flagstaff out of the equation, because Flagstaff just didn't really run his A race in this spot, it wasn't the toughest field outside of that horse. So I thought McKenzie, he did what he had to do. I wasn't bowled over from a visual standpoint by what he did. He's run some much faster speed figures in the past, and to me, he didn't quite look like the same horse that we had seen in races like the Breeders' Cup Classic and the Met Mile, and especially the Whitney last year. But I'm not going to doubt that he can get back to that, and if Bob Baffert ends up shipping him to the Met Mile, I think it's safe to assume that he expects a big effort out of him, so we'll see if McKenzie takes a step forward off this race. And with that, I guess let's go into the handicapping of this weekend's races. We've got 6 to talk about. Let's save Belmont for last, and we'll begin with the 2 one-off races at other tracks, beginning at Churchill Downs and the Louisville Stakes run on Saturday. Grade 3 event going 1.5 miles on the turf. And the favorite in here is likely to be the number 5 Arklow. This is a horse who's coming out of the Grade 1 Pegasus World Cup turf where he was 5th behind Zulu Alpha. Had a big year in 2019, placed in a lot of major stakes races, ended up getting his Grade 1 victory in the Turf Classic towards the end of the year. If Arklow shows up with his best effort, he's going to be tough to beat.
He is, but I don't think that's a given. He's a horse who is kind of pace dependent, but I don't know. He's always been kind of an enigma for me. When I don't bet him, he seems to win. When I like him, he doesn't. So he's always been a tough horse for me to figure out. The top 3 on the morning line are him, Admission Office, and Tiz a Slam. I think deservedly so. Of the 3, the one I'm most against would be Tiz a Slam. It's a race. It's a big field. The pace projector has a pace projected as fast, and he's a horse shown pretty far back despite his last 5 wins all coming wire to wire, something that would be very tough to do on Saturday. So of those 3, I'm most against him, and given my troubles with Arklow, I'd say the one I prefer the most out of those 3 is Admission Office. I think his last race is kind of a throwout. It was too short for him. It was a race where the winner, whose name I'm forgetting now, but went wire to wire, had backed up a previous win, ran a fast time. He didn't have a great trip. He was probably up closer than he normally likes to be, particularly at that shorter distance. So I'm looking for a rebound for him, and he would be my top selection in here. If there's one other horse in the race I like that's at a big price, it would be Sky Promise. He's a horse who's been running on dirt. He won at this longer distance last time on the dirt. He has run on the turf several times in the past, and I think his turf form's a little bit dirtied up. I think he's probably one of those horses that is as good on turf as he is on dirt and can go both ways. So with the distance, I think he's got a shot in the price, and I'll certainly be using him in my vertical bets.
Yeah, Arklow's a pretty good horse, so I don't want to be hard on him. I think he is a deserving favorite in this race. His Pegasus World Cup trip, it wasn't ideal. He was actually the horse that veered out so severely at the start and caused a lot of problems for horses like Sadler's Joy, who got squeezed back that day. And I thought he was pretty wide thereafter and actually was game to get up for 5th in that spot because he was not in a good situation at the top of the stretch there. His best race is probably going to be this field. We'll see. He's not a horse that loves to win races. He often gets a piece, so I'm not afraid to take a shot against him, but I think he's the kind of horse that you probably should key your wagers around because he's going to be there at the end. As for Admission Office, yeah, he makes plenty of sense in this race. Stretching out to the 1.5 miles shouldn't be a big problem since he's tried it in the past. He arguably ran the best race of his career going 1 3/8 in that McDermott, a 2-back behind Zulu Alpha. I'm just kind of getting sick of Admission Office. I feel like we keep talking about him in these races, and he takes some money, but he gets just a piece of it. He finishes 2nd, 3rd, 4th. He's even more notorious in that sense than Arklow is. Maybe he gets the job done here coming from way back. I don't know. He's just not my favorite horse, so I'll use him, but I'd rather take a look at some others. Tis a Slam, I agree with you about the pace situation. It's really not the kind of setup that he wants. I will say he ran better than it seems in the Red Smith last fall, his final race of the year. I know it looks like he tailed off that day, but that was a pace that just completely fell apart, and I didn't think he got the most clever ride that day, sort of making a premature move on the backstretch. So that race is actually a lot better than it seems for him, and he's got races going back that make him competitive. He actually won this race last year. It's just this Louisville came up a bit tougher than what you would have expected for a grade 3 race, so I'm not quite sold on him in this spot. I'm going to take a shot with a long shot in here. That's the number 4. He's No Lemon. I know he looks way too slow on speed figures, but he's a horse that his 3-year-old campaign ended in September. So he's been off for a long time and he's coming back in a pretty tough spot, but he's the kind of horse for Graham Motion that might be able to take a big step forward from 3 to 4. He's got one of these late developing pedigrees. He's bred to run all day. He's tried longer distances, actually pretty early on in his 3-year-old campaign, and it seemed like that's what he really wanted to do. I liked his effort at Saratoga last summer, and I thought his performance in that Bald Eagle Derby down at Laurel, going this distance back in September of last year, was better than it seems, because I thought Trevor McCarthy maybe rode him a bit too overconfidently that day, gave away a lot of ground on the turn, just left him with way too much ground to make up on the stretch. So I feel like this horse is better than he seems. This is a big step up in class, but he's going to be a pretty big price in this race, so I'm not afraid to take a shot with him.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. You know, I'm a big fan of kind of projecting figures upward for horses like this. He's lightly raced. He hadn't raced in about 3/4 of a year. He should have matured in that time. Graham Motion does just fine off the layoff, and he's also a guy who is pretty hot right now. He's been winning races at Churchill, winning stakes races, so no problem at all with that selection, and I will definitely put him on my tickets if I play some horizontals.
Let's head down to Gulfstream Park for their feature race on Saturday, which is actually a non-stakes event. It's just a handicap, going a mile on the dirt, and pretty interesting conditions for this race because you do really have some handicap weights in here. The top weight is 125 pounds, that being Diamond Oops, who's a graded stakes winner. Rightly so that he's the top weight in this race. But you've also got a horse like Math Wizard, who won the Grade 1 Pennsylvania Derby last year. He's weighted at 123. So you've got a big spread here. It's a race where these two horses really do stick out from a class standpoint. Do you think that weight is going to do anything to even the playing field here, or are these just way the two horses to beat?
I mean, weight, I think it has a small effect. These aren't like we talk about with Kelso or Forgo where they're carrying 135 pounds. So I use that term handicap here just a little bit loosely in here, but they're definitely the two horses to beat. I will say of the two, I much prefer Diamond Oops. He's been faster. Now I know that Math Wizard is a newly turned 4-year-old. He probably has some right to improve, but I just think Diamond Oops is in better current form. Math Wizard didn't look particularly good to me when he showed up at Oaklawn. I think it's a better distance for him. So he would be my top selection in here. If I was going to look for a couple upsetters, the most likely one that's probably obvious to most people is Noble Drama. He ran a nice 119 Timeform US speed figure when he was second behind Network Effect. That one came back to run a good second in the Carter, as we talked about Vacoma's win there. But he was well back, but I thought he ran pretty well, backed up his figure, and I think he can be competitive with these. And the other horse I want to mention that I like at a price is Eye of a Jedi. He's another one. He's an improving 5-year-old. His figures keep getting better. He is going to need some pace in here, but if he does get it, he'll be gaining late, and he's a horse on the turn back that I will definitely be using in some vertical bets.
It's a funny race in that there's really not a lot of pace signed on. I mean, I guess the two horses that are going to be towards the front end are Wentz and Latrushka. They're both front-running types. Wentz doesn't seem like he wants to go this far, and Latrushka just doesn't look good enough. So maybe it falls apart a little bit, but it's interesting that two of the main players, especially Math Wizard and also Noble Drama, they just have no early speed. So they're going to have to be coming from farther back than Diamond Oops, who, while Diamond Oops is a closer sometime, he's got more tactical speed than those other two, and he's been competitive and closer to the pace in some sprint races. So I would imagine Diamond Oops is going to get the jump on those horses. I'm on the same page as you. I don't care about weight that much in this situation. It's not that big of a spread, and I just think Diamond Oops Oops is probably better than these horses. And furthermore, the 1-turn mile seems like a great distance for Diamond Oops, where that might be a little bit short for Math Wizard, who seems like more of a 2-turn type. So I've got nothing clever here. I just think this is probably Diamond Oops' race to lose, and we'll maybe see him in a tougher spot next time.
Yeah, it's. I did want to mention with Diamond Oops, it's easy. He kind of had that breakout race in the Vanderbilt when he was second behind Imperial and have really big odds. And since then, other than his Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, where he had a bit of a bad start and not the easiest trip, the horse has ripped off nothing but mid-120s TimeformUS speed figures. So he does kind of lay over this field that way. And if he shows up, like I said, he would be my top pick. I mentioned a few other horses, but I didn't want to make it sound like I really think they're better than him, because he's turned into a really good older horse.
It's funny, Patrick Biancone just seems to have all these horses that can run on both dirt and dirt in his stable at a pretty high level, and Diamond Oops is another one. I mean, it makes sense they'd focus on dirt races at this point because there are plenty of lucrative prizes out there, and maybe we could even see him in a race like the Met Mile moving forward, because he certainly has the credentials if he passes this hurdle. Move on to Belmont Park, where we're going to talk about the late pick 4 sequence on Saturday, races 7 through 10. The big race is the Ogden Phipps in the 9th. We'll get there in a little bit. But beginning with the 7th race, it's a maiden special weight going a mile on the Widener turf for the fillies and mares. And I would assume the favorite's going to be towards the outside, the number 10, Too Sexy. There are a few first-time starters that we'll talk about. Maybe they could take some money. But Too Sexy's run well in both of her starts down at Gulfstream Park, finishing right behind Mamina's team. A pretty decent maiden allowance level horse down there in both races. So she looks like the horse to beat if nobody else takes a step forward, but there are some other ways to go.
Yeah, I don't love her races. I mean, she's a logical favorite. I think your morning line's spot on here, but I'm not going to single her or anything like that. There are a couple others in here that interest me. The one that interests me most is Windfall Profit. She's coming in from Tampa, where she kind of had a wide trip last time, made an early move into what was a slow pace and kind of quickened it up. She kept that run going for a long time. I mean, she started that move early on the backstretch, gained the lead late stretch, and was only passed very late by a horse who had a rail skimming ride. That horse has come back to win again at Tampa in a nice allowance race with a similar figure. So I actually prefer Windfall Profit a little bit to the favorite Too Sexy in here. The other horse that interests me, of course, is one of the Chad Brown firsters, and that's Cost Benefit. He has 2 in here, but I much prefer her to the other. I'll leave you to talk about the breeding on those. But from the breeding standpoint, I just prefer this one much more than the 2-horse Davina in here.
Yeah, I've got nothing really to add about Windfall Profit. I agree with what you said about her trip last time. It was just not a winning trip. I mean, premature move on the backstretch, wide on the far turn. She had a right to lose that race or to hang on the money at the end. But this is a tougher spot, so we'll see if she can make that step forward. But she definitely showed some potential last time. I think, yeah, the interesting horses to talk about are the first-time turfers and the first-time starters. As for those 2 Chad Brown runners, I agree with you. Cost Benefit seems like the right one. The other horse, Dovima, she's a daughter of Union Rags. I've talked about it a lot. I don't like the Union Rags on the turf. You can look it up in DRF Formulator. I believe his stats overall with starters on the turf for Union Rags are 4% winners. That's really one of the worst numbers that you'll see among top sires. And also on the dam side for Dovima, it's really more of a dirt pedigree. She's a half to Secret Gypsy, who was a good horse for Ronnie Werner in dirt sprints a number of years ago. So I just don't really get the turf move with this horse. Cost Benefit, on the other hand, it's like night and day. This filly is all turf pedigree by that great European sire Dan Silly. Not a ton of immediate female class in the female family. She's a half to a listed stakes placed runner. But the dam herself, she's a half to a mare called Zamarada, who was actually 3rd, I believe, in the Breeders' Cup filly and mare turf going back to the early 2000s. She was a champion mare in Italy. So there is quality going deeper in this pedigree on the turf over in Europe. And Cost Benefit has been working very well. You can watch a bunch of her works on XBTV. Chad Brown's been pairing her with a couple of runners, one of which was Jazik, who I believe was stakes placed in the Miss Grillo last year, and it seems like Cost Benefit just outworking every horse that she's paired with. So seems like this one is going to be the one that's live. We'll see how much money she takes. I don't know if I'd want to be all in on her as a favorite if she goes off really short in this race, but she's definitely the one that I would want. Just to give one more mention to a horse that's trying the turf for the first time, the number 8 Empire Lady showed absolutely nothing in her debut on the dirt at Gulfstream, but this is a pedigree that's supposed to really translate well to the turf. She's by Empire Maker, and on the dam side, it's just all turf. She's out of a Galileo dam. She's a half to a turf stakes winner. So this is one that could really move up in the surface switch.
Yeah, and that's certainly something Jimmy Toner's done plenty of times in the past. I do want to mention just one thing before we move on. I opened up Formulator to kind of look through those turf breeding stats, and in the new Formulator, there really is a lot more information than there used to be on the breeding side. You can look up all the siblings, get past performances for the mare, the dam, the sire, and the siblings. So really an improvement from Formulator. I don't often use it, but that is one of the things I open it for.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that tool, and you can really go down a rabbit hole looking up a lot of information in there, especially with the pedigrees and the trainer stats. Let's move on to the 8th race, which is the second leg of this pick 4 sequence. It's a New York bred nometers of 1 allowance going 6 furlongs on the dirt for the fillies and mares. And I think the center of this race is towards the center of the field. I guess the favorite could be the number 9 Behind the Couch. She's kind of a difficult horse to assess because she showed a lot of promise last summer. She picked up a stakes placing right out of her maiden win in the Bowery, and she ran really well in a pretty fast race back in June, going a mile. But things just sort of went off track after that. She got pulled up in that Fleet Indian behind Newly Minted, and then she came back as an odds-on favorite at Belmont, and while she didn't run badly that day, she was well beaten, and that race, it hasn't come back as the strongest, so I'm just not really sure where she stands at this point.
Yeah, this is probably the toughest race of the sequence for me. It's a full field of 12. The pace projector thinks the pace is going to be fast. I don't have any crazy opinions in here. I do think Behind the Couch is the one to beat. But I'll also use horses like Officer Hutchie and Good Credence in here. I think either one of those is good enough to win. Officer Hutchie's been versatile. Looks like she'll probably get a good setup. Whereas Good Credence had a bit of a trip last time, got basically eliminated at the start where she likes to be more close up. And her back races are certainly good enough. The only other horse I wanted to try to make a case for Waylon Josie, the 6th horse in here, but I got to tell you, I watched Heman Harkey ride yesterday. I've obviously seen him before, but he just looks so bad. I would have trouble putting any of my money on a horse like that, even on a rider like that, even at a price. The guy looks like he's regressed. I don't want to beat up on jockeys. He is a 7-pound apprentice, but very rarely do I notice something like I saw yesterday. So I'm not interested in that one.
Yeah, it's horses like Waylon Josie are tough because she's got the speed figures to put her in the mix, but I agree. It's a tough rider to bet, especially at Belmont Park when you really have a lot of the elite riders in action at this point. You just rarely see riders like Heman Harkey winning races here, but it happens every so often. I just wouldn't want to take any kind of short or even middling price on her. I agree. I mean, I would mostly go 3 deep in here. I just don't want to really rely on Behind the Couch because I don't trust her. I've got no problem with Officer Hutchie. She's got to move forward a little bit, but she's a 3-year-old, so she can obviously take a step forward going from February until June off this 4-month layoff. I thought she showed some promise over the winter. If I had to make a top pick in this race, it would be the number 10 Good Credence. As you said, she sort of got squeezed back at the start last time, just wasn't really ever in that race, and the winner of that one, Bernie, down at Gulfstream, she's actually shown herself to be pretty good, so I'm not going to be too hard on Good Credence for finishing far back that day. I thought her prior effort in the Maid of the Mist was actually pretty good because she might not really want to go a mile, and she held on well enough to be 3rd that day. I liked her maiden victory last year. She just seems like one that could take a step forward. She's another 3-year-old that has a right to improve her speed figures, so I just won't be shocked if all of them are able, or a couple of them are able to surpass Behind the Couch, who's the 4-year-old in this race, and I think we might have seen the best of her already.
Yeah, no problem. I do want to mention that Bernie race is actually one that's proven pretty strong. She came back to win again, then had a good second, and there's more than a couple horses in there who have come back, and even if they didn't win, have actually elevated their figure. So that was a really good race for the class.
Up next is the main event on Saturday at Belmont Park. It's the Grade 1 Ogden Phipps going a mile and the 16th for the fillies and mares. And admittedly, this is not one of the strongest versions of the Ogden Phipps that we've ever seen. It's not being run on Belmont Stakes Day this year, so you probably don't have as many big barns shipping in from other parts of the country for this spot as there usually would be. But we do have some nice horses in this field. It's just 6 runners, but it's a pretty competitive spot. And we've got the second and third place finishers from the Apple Blossom. We've talked about that race quite a bit. Ollie's Candy ran very well, setting a pretty fast pace that day. Just got nipped at the wire by CC. Point of Honor, she also ran well in her own right because she was really far back early, made a wide run around the second turn to get up for third. They're the 2 horses to beat, but I think you could make a case for a lot of runners in this race.
Yeah, I was going to make that same point. I don't like every horse in the field, but I couldn't argue with any handicapper that could probably make a case for each horse individually in here. They all have some pretty decent credentials, so it is a strong field, just a strong field of 6. The pace projector doesn't have any particular flag on here where it favors early or thinks the pace is going to be hot. I'm really interested to see what they're going to do with Ollie's Candy because I think she ran her best race in that Apple Blossom, really being gunned from the start. She took it right to the field. And it was just a good, solid effort. I do have a little concern. She seems to drop a lot of those close decisions lately. She's a horse who doesn't always have that big fight at the end, but she's going to be in there. But she is going to have to deal with Blamed. She's stretching out to a longer distance than she's been running recently, if ever. I'm not sure if she has run it. It's been quite a while. She looked pretty good in that allowance race. She's the one horse I probably couldn't make any case that she could win. I don't see how she could fight a horse like Ollie's Candy inside of her and still have enough left to win at this mile and a 16th distance, but I still think she'll be a factor in the race. Some of the others you talked about, Point of Honor, she's got a lot going for her, but once again, the distance might be a little bit too short. In these cases, I'm never sure if the 1 turn mile and a 16th is going to help or hurt her. I would suspect it would probably help her a little bit, so I'm not totally against her. The horse that I am a little bit interested in at a bit of a price is She's a Julie. She ran against Dunbar Road last time in that listed stakes, the Shawnee Stakes at Churchill in her first race back. She actually broke terrible. She broke in the air, had a just nightmare trip from there. She was wide around the turn. It was just ugly. She actually was in contention at the top of the stretch before rightfully packing it in. So you could look at that race and think maybe she just had enough. Her form had kind of tailed off at the end of 2019. It didn't look that great there, but knowing Steve Asmussen, he doesn't usually have horses cranked up first time back off the layoff, and I expect a much effort from She's a Julie, so I'm going to use her. I don't know if I go to the point of saying she's my top pick. If I had to make a top pick, I'd probably use, say, either Ollie's Candy or Point of Honor, but she's the one I think is going to offer some value, and I'm going to use in here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could make that case that she needed her first start off the layoff last time. I kind of have written off She's a Julie way before her last race. I don't know. I just feel like she wasn't really informed towards the end of last year, and maybe this was the plan all along. I just don't know. But she's not for me in this spot, but I can understand the case that you're making for her. Point of Honor, we'll see. It feels like that these 2 horses, Ollie's Candy and Point of Honor, are going to take a lot of money. Point of Honor just always seems to take a lot of money. She's just one of these popular horses. And I get it because she's got this really exciting finish to her. I agree with you that the mile and the 16th, it's not the best distance for her. She wants to go a little bit farther. We'll also see how much pace she gets in here. I mean, I wonder what they're going to do with She's a Julie. Do you think they're going to be aggressive with her? Because she's run well when she gets forwardly placed in the past, but I think it's going to be tough to go with Blamed early because Blamed is the kind of horse that really does seem to need to be out winging her in the clear to have her best shot. So you'd think they'd use her aggressively. I don't think it's going to heat up to the point that it's really going to fall apart for Point of Honor. Not that it necessarily needs to, because Point of Honor is good enough to win this race without a great setup. I just think Ollie's Candy maybe ran a bit better than her last time, and I don't really have a major knock against Ollie's Candy because it's not just the Apple Blossom. She's been good for a while. She needed her first start off the layoff in the Beholder, but she was good towards the end of last year. She didn't get a great ride in the Zenyatta, but her Breeders' Cup Distaff was solid. She was 4th that day. She was in good form over the summer. She's earned plenty of speed figures that are higher than many of these have earned. So I just think she's the horse to beat. I want to look for a little bit of value, so I want to go in a slightly different direction and take a shot with the number 6 Golden Award. Golden Award to me, if you just look at her and say she doesn't like a sloppy track, she becomes a lot more appealing because it's hard to like her last race in the Royal Delta when she was beaten by Cookie Dough, who is just an inferior horse to these. But Golden Award probably didn't like the surface that day, and before that, she was rounding into, to be maybe not a grade 1 level horse, but maybe this isn't a grade 1 level race. So I think if she runs her typical grade 2 kind of performance, she can be right there because her turn back the alarm was good. I loved her shoe lead from last year. Obviously, something went wrong in the personal ensign, but she just seems like one that's coming along at the right time. I like the outside post position. She's going to get a good stalking trip. So I just think if she's the third choice in this race, that's the right price on her.
The only horse I think we haven't mentioned yet is Pink Sands. I know she's a horse we both liked at Gulfstream this winter a couple times out. She's going a little longer than she has in the past, but she's a horse I don't particularly care for in her. It's only a 6-horse field, and we hadn't mentioned her. I think she's got great setups, those last two, even though neither one of them are coded in red by TimeformUS. They were races that kind of had that late flow to them and really set up for her late kick. I think this is probably really pushing it with her distance, and I think she would need a really hot piece, and I don't see that happening in here.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. I'm a big fan of Pink Sands as a horse. She's just one that I like to root for, but I think circumstances really played into those victories the last 2 times, and she's just not going to get the same setup in here. This sequence closes out with the 10th race. It's a starter allowance on the turf going a mile for the fillies and mares, and I think this is a pretty interesting way to end the sequence because you could probably go one of 2 ways here. You could say, all right, Bean Counter, the number 2, she's just better than these. She's been keeping good company. She's run some faster speed figures. She's just going to win at a short price. Or you could say, Bean Counter's been a short price a number of times down at Gulfstream, and she just hasn't been getting it done. And even though she looks faster than these, I want to take a shot against her. And I'm leaning more towards that second point of view.
I am as well. There's actually a horse I really like in here. This is a race that TimeformUS Pace Projector thinks the pace is going to be fast, and Bean Counter's lost so many times at short prices that I just can't be on her side. Last time, she ran that 97 speed figure, but she set a slow pace. She had things her own way. She couldn't hold off Augusta Moon. So I'm just not a big fan of this horse, so I'm going to take a shot against her. There is a horse I actually really like in here, and that's Hurricane Breeze. She's a horse who last time out, first time for trainer Mike Maker, she matched her lifetime top. And she didn't just match her lifetime top, she did it against a slow pace, making up ground that day. So she's a horse I'm not going to go very deep in here, and she is going to be my A horse. I may even single her. Just depends how much I can whittle down the other 3 races to make it more manageable. The other horse I think people would look at is Corey Scores. She's first time for Brad Cox. But, she's, I think, the third or fourth choice she's the third choice on the morning line. But coming from the Chad Brown barn, I've just never been a big fan of this horse. I know Brad Cox does good things with his new acquisitions. But this isn't one I'm a fan of. She comes off a layoff, which isn't a strong suit of hers. So I'm against her in here. If I had to use a second horse, it would probably be Bean Counter before I pick Corey Scores.
Yeah, there are 4 horses in this race that interest me. I mean, Bean Counter, I'm not gonna leave her out. You have to use a horse like her for playing a pick 4, pick 5 sequence. I just don't want to rely on her as the favorite in this race. I've got no issues with Hurricane Breeze. I agree with what you said, and she's a 3-year-old. She could take a step forward. I'm definitely using her. Corey Scores, I'm not quite as enamored with her form, but it's Brad Cox. He's dangerous. She's one that I wouldn't want to let beat me. The horse at a price in this race that intrigues me is the number 8, Gloriously. We'll see how big of a price she is in this spot, but she's one that I think could really appreciate routing on the turf. If you pick apart her form, one of the best races that she has run was actually her turf race, but it was going 5 furlongs on the turf at Gulfstream. And I mean, number 1, she was facing a pretty good horse in First Wave who won that spot. I don't know if First Wave has run back since then. I didn't look it up, but she had shown some real potential in maiden races. And Gloriously ran fine that day and really seemed like she took to the turf as if that might be her best surface. And after that, she's gotten rained off the turf twice in a row. They stretched her out to a mile last time on the dirt, and she actually liked the added ground. She got to the lead speed, set a legitimate pace, and held on. Wasn't beating anything, but at least showed she could get the mile distance. And just putting 2 and 2 together, I think maybe going longer on the turf is what this horse really wants to do. Now, I don't love the pace projector, but I don't know if she's one that necessarily needs to be in front to be successful, and she's going to be a price in this race. So I'd make her my top pick because she's going to be value, and I'd use her pretty prominently in the pick 4.
The other horse I would mention if I were going to use a price horse is the 7 Princess Falsia for Linda Rice. She won first time out. I mean, nothing too great. She had a nice trip that day. She took advantage of it. But I do like she ran a 79, but that was back in September as a 2-year-old. She comes back a good, I guess, 3/4 of a year, 9 months later. So she could easily, with any forward movement, be a contender in here. So if I was going to throw in like a seahorse, it would be her for me.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk anybody off a Linda Rice second-time starter. Those are very dangerous. This one has to improve a lot, but we've seen that happen many a time. So it's an interesting sequence. I think there are some heavy favorites along the way, but there are no horses that I would really lean on too heavily. So it's one where I'd want to have a little bit of coverage in every leg, even especially this last one. There's a big favorite, but I think you want to go a little bit deeper than it might seem at first glance. So not the easiest sequence to hit, even though it's just 4 races involved.
Yeah, I would agree. I think
Yep.
it's a good I think it's a good solid sequence. It's one I will definitely be playing because I think it's going to offer some value, and I really enjoyed handicapping this one. And I know it probably sounds funny, but when I really get into handicapping and it's not Reese's, I'm just trying to trudge through to get to the next leg and don't really care for them. I don't do as well, but this is one I really liked. I thought all 4 races were interesting handicapping puzzles, and look forward to watching and betting all of them.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those sequences where I'm not going to be shocked if all 4 favorites lose, and those are the ones that typically pay well. So if you play it that way, you've got a chance to make a score. Well, that's it for this week. Obviously, we'll be back next week with this schedule we've got going to do the forecast. I'm sorry. Let me correct myself, actually. Next week is Belmont Stakes week. So we're actually going to skip the forecast next week just with other things going on. We'll be back in 2 weeks to do the TimeformUS Forecast, recapping Belmont Stakes week, and then we'll look ahead to the next weekend's racing. So stay tuned for that in a couple of weeks. But Craig, always good to recap these races and talk about the handicapping with you. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.